Curtis Hawkins was ordered to clean the hangar floor, not to touch the $30 million jet he once designed. An officer spit near his boots and laughed. "You fixin' birds now, janitor." But when the Falcon's systems failed during a live Pentagon test, only one man knew why. He reached for a toolkit, and they reached for security. What they didn't know, he'd already rewritten the override code. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The elite engineers couldn't get the F-16 to budge, and whispers filled the hangar. "Don't let the old black guy near it." The heat shimmered off the tarmac at Edwards Air Force Base like a living thing. It was the kind of California afternoon that made metal hiss and tempers fray. Inside Hangar 7, a sleek gray F-16 Falcon sat cold and defiant on the runway, its nose pointed upward as if mocking the team of white-coated engineers buzzing uselessly around it. Something was wrong. The diagnostics blinked red for the fourth time. The techs had rebooted systems, triple-checked circuits, even brought in a secondary ground unit for cross-test. Still, the Falcon remained stubbornly unresponsive, silent as a tomb. "What the hell is this?" barked Chief Engineer Darren Matheson, slamming his clipboard against a tool cart. "This is a goddamn embarrassment. The brass lands in less than 48 hours, and the bird won't even blink." His voice carried through the hangar like a shot, making two interns flinch and another look at the floor. No one dared reply, not after yesterday's outburst. At the far corner, near the rear fuel bay, a man in a faded navy jumpsuit moved methodically across the floor, sweeping dust that had been blown in through the open service doors. Curtis Hawkins didn't look up. He never did. He'd been sweeping that corner for nearly 5 years. Once, his hands had danced over the bones of fighter jets in ways few had ever mastered. Once, his name had echoed in briefing rooms and encrypted channels from the Persian Gulf to Langley. Once, he'd been the go-to avionics whisperer during Operation Desert Storm. They used to say Hawk could read a plane's pain before it even blinked an error. Now he mopped oil spills and collected trash bags in silence, a ghost haunting the same aircraft he once brought back from the brink. "Maybe we should just call the museum," one of the younger engineers joked, his voice low but not low enough. "Ask if they want their relic back." Laughter followed. Sharp, pointed, the kind that sticks. Another added, "This isn't Tuskegee Airman territory anymore. This bird's for real pilots." Hawk didn't flinch, but a muscle near his jaw tightened, barely. Chief Matheson turned toward the murmur and smirked. "Don't let the old black guy near it," he said, more to the room than to anyone in particular. "Last thing we need is a PR nightmare if the jet bursts into flames on his watch." Nobody laughed this time, but no one pushed back either. The silence was complicit. The base commander, Colonel William Redman, stood stiffly by the flight control panel, arms crossed, jaw locked. He'd been in command only 6 months. New blood, Navy transfer. He wasn't a racist man, or so he told himself. He just knew optics, and bringing in a retired janitor, regardless of his legend, would look like desperation, or worse, favoritism. "No," Redman finally said. "We've got 2 more teams inbound from Langley. We don't need theatrics." Behind them, Hawk stopped sweeping. For just a second, he looked at the Falcon, and he listened. It was a barely perceptible hum. Not mechanical, not digital. Something deeper, intuitive. The air around the jet was off, like a string slightly out of tune. It was the same type of whisper he'd once followed in the Middle East, when a diagnostics board claimed everything was fine right before a jet fell out of the sky. He knew that sound, but still, he said nothing. That night, the base quieted. The heat broke into a low wind that swept through the hangars and rattled the metal siding. Most engineers left the site exhausted, frustrated, some still texting theories to each other. Thermal degradation, power loop desync, external jamming. No one had answers, only pressure. Inside his tiny quarters near the maintenance wing, Hawk sat at a small desk littered with old notes, crumpled aviation manuals, and a single black and white photo of a much younger version of himself, standing beside an earlier model jet, with a prideful smile. He pulled out a sheet of paper, not the kind anyone typed on, not for official comms, just a pen, his hand, and 4 simple words. "Let me fix it." Just once. He folded it with care, tucked it into a small envelope, and made his way through the empty corridors like a shadow. The commander's office was quiet, locked of course, but the mail slot welcomed the note like it had been waiting. As Hawk turned to walk back into the night, the camera above the hallway blinked. And somewhere, on the other side of the base, in a private office, a Pentagon liaison just received word that the F-16 failure had reached DEFCON Priority 3. That morning, the note was found under Colonel Redmond's door, unmarked but unmistakable. He stared at it for a full minute before whispering to himself, who the hell told him it failed? A man who saved pilots now empties trash cans by choice. Curtis Hawk Hawkins lived in a modest two-room barrack, wedged between the South Maintenance hangar and the airstrip fencing. Technically, it wasn't designed for habitation anymore, just leftover space from the Cold War era, but he'd taken it when the Air Force quietly offered a retirement exit that felt more like an erasure. The room was old, like him, but it was close to the sky. The walls were lined with framed aviation medals, some dulled by time, others still gleaming beneath layers of dust. He never polished them anymore. The point wasn't to showcase, it was to remember. Above his bunk, a single shelf bore the most haunting memorabilia. Unopened letters from the Pentagon, postmarked over the course of 15 years. Their corners curled now, their warnings and apologies sealed shut in government speak. He had read none of them. His silence wasn't bitterness. It was protest. No one had officially fired him. They'd simply stopped calling. Hawk sat at his makeshift workbench, a lamp illuminating the miniature model of an F-16 he had been constructing for the past few weeks. But this wasn't just a hobby. Every measurement, every angle, every detail mimicked the base's problematic bird. He'd replayed the public footage from its failed startup over and over, feeding the jet's movements through a reverse engineering simulator he'd coded on an old laptop. In the real world, the engineers couldn't get the bird to move. In Hawk's world, the bird whispered exactly what it needed. His hands moved slowly but surely, placing a tiny sensor replica into the fuselage. His face, though aged and creased by decades of sun and frustration, carried the quiet fire of someone who still heard the hum beneath the machine's skin. It wasn't just metal, it was memory, muscle, trust, but no one else remembered. There had been a time, years earlier, when Curtis Hawkins wasn't just remembered, he was relied upon. Not as a technician, as a miracle. He was stationed in the Gulf during Operation Desert Storm, when a squadron's avionics system failed mid-air. Pilots were blind, flying death tubes. Hawk had been flown in, under classified urgency. Within 18 hours, he decoded a software loop error the manufacturers didn't even know existed, created a temporary patch using his own custom interface, and wrote a procedural fix that became part of NATO's emergency aviation playbook. But you'd never find his name in the public records. It was the beginning of a pattern. Breakthroughs denied, ideas stolen, reports cleaned up before distribution. His commanders would praise him in private, and then pass the credit to a more palatable face, a younger, whiter officer more aligned with their culture of cohesion. When Hawk began documenting these patterns, quietly at first, things turned. He was passed up for a major promotion that went to a man who once asked Hawk how to turn on the base's encrypted radio unit. He watched that same man later take credit for Hawk's infrared fault detection patent during a NATO summit. But Hawk stayed in. Not for them. For the birds. The final blow came when he was subpoenaed to testify in a racial bias case. A young black pilot had been grounded permanently after reporting harassment by his flight instructor. Hawk corroborated his story. That's when the silence began. He wasn't fired. He wasn't even demoted. But the emails stopped. The calls disappeared. Suddenly, there were no more projects needing his expertise. His clearance was under review. Invitations vanished. His office was reassigned. They offered him a consultancy job out of state, then rescinded it without explanation. Months later, he was offered a retirement package with one caveat. He could stay on base. As janitor, most would have declined. But Hawk accepted. Quietly. He never told anyone why he took it. But the truth was simple. If they wouldn't let him fix the birds, he'd at least stay near them. The hangars still needed sweeping, and the aircraft still hummed. He could feel them. They remembered him, even if the men didn't. And not everyone forgot. Young black airmen, mostly mechanics and communication staff, whispered his name in break rooms. Always cautiously. "That's Hawk," they'd say, under their breath. "Legend. Desert Storm. Stealth override tech. Yeah, him." Some would leave an extra sandwich near his locker. Others would nod, subtly, in the hallways. He never responded, not to maintain distance, but to protect them. Affiliation with Hawk had become, quietly, a kind of warning label in military circles. But late at night, he would sometimes hear footsteps near his door. Notes slid under the threshold. Questions scribbled on scratch paper. Sir, do you think this sensor failure could be a torque sync issue? How did you route diagnostics without bypassing power loop? Will you teach me? He never signed his replies, just left pages of equations or schematics folded into a garbage bin they'd accidentally empty too soon. And still the base pretended he was just a ghost with a broom. That's what made the F-16 failure different. It wasn't just a mechanical issue. It was a pattern. He knew the bird's design, even the classified backdoors that were never declassified, because he had designed them. And when he heard the public talk of complete system failure and inexplicable power loop errors, he knew instantly they were testing something new, something unstable, possibly patched over, without understanding the original architecture. Which meant the jet didn't need new engineers. It needed its original voice. That night, after slipping the note beneath Colonel Redmond's door, Hawk returned to his model. He made final adjustments, stabilizer fins, data link relay, then powered down the desk lamp. But he didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, recalling the first time a jet ever listened to him. He'd been 22. The avionics bay had glitched mid-flight, and Hawk, still a recruit, had rewritten a protocol during descent. They landed alive. The commander never reported it. Hawk was thanked with silence. That moment was the beginning of everything. At 5:03 a.m., the sun still a faint blue smear on the horizon. Hawk stood before the mirror, lacing his boots, slowly, deliberately. He opened his closet, and from behind his spare jumpsuits and base-assigned uniform, he pulled out an old patchwork jacket. It was faded USAF blue, decorated with years of wear. On the sleeve, a stitched red triangle, Desert Storm insignia. On the chest, a name tag no one had uttered in years. Hawkins. He pulled it on. The weight fit like memory. He took one last look at the jet model, then walked out into the breaking light. Every step toward Hangar 7, echoing not with defiance but with purpose. Just as he turned the final corner to the hangar, a security jeep pulled up beside him. The driver leaned out, stunned. Sir, did someone call you in? Hawk didn't break stride. Not yet, he said. But they will. They laughed until the jet blinked once under his hand. The double doors of Hangar 7 groaned open, just after sunrise, casting a long shaft of golden light across the cold metal body of the grounded F-16. The engineers inside, already jittery and under-caffeinated, turned instinctively at the creak of the hinges. Then the laughter began. It wasn't loud. Not at first. Just a single chuckle. Then a smirk passed from one pair of lips to another. But as the silhouette stepped into full view, carrying nothing more than a roll of tools slung under one arm, and a faded USAF jacket draped across his shoulders, the energy shifted into something sharper. Would you look at that? Muttered Peterson, one of the senior systems guys, nudging his colleague. Thought we ordered a new diagnostic unit, not a history exhibit. A burst of stifled laughter followed. Curtis Hawkins didn't respond. His eyes moved past the smirks, past the tight arms-crossed stances, and landed directly on the F-16. The plane looked cold, even from a distance, like a living thing betrayed by its own heartbeat. He felt it. That stillness. It wasn't mechanical. It was spiritual. And that bird was grieving. Colonel Redmond appeared from the upper deck stairwell, visibly startled. His face contorted in quiet frustration as he descended with quick practice steps. Mr. Hawkins, he called out. You were not requested in this hangar. Hawk stopped 3 steps in. He looked up, his face unreadable. Didn't need to be. Redman's jaw locked. You left a note. That's not protocol. No, sir, Hawk replied calmly. It's instinct. That one word, instinct, carried more weight than the room expected. Redman was about to reply when the loudspeaker crackled to life overhead. Command notification, Pentagon Advance Team has landed. Estimated arrival, 8 minutes. The hangar fell into a sudden, uneasy silence. The engineers scrambled into motion, some checking instruments, others brushing off uniforms or pretending to look productive. Redman hesitated. The words caught behind clenched teeth. He couldn't afford a scene, not with DCIs inbound. He gave Hawk a tight nod. Fine. 10 minutes. Don't touch anything critical. Hawk didn't wait. He walked straight to the Falcon. As he approached, one of the engineers, Jordan Lively, early 30s, smug, stepped in front of the access ladder. Where do you think you're going, old man? Hawk tilted his head slightly. You got diagnostics running. Yeah, Lively scoffed. And nothing's working. Hawk nodded once. Then step aside. Lively let out a laugh. Be my guest. Show us how you fixed birds back in the Reagan era. Maybe duct tape's the answer. More laughter. Louder this time. Hawk climbed the ladder in silence. Inside the cockpit, the smell of synthetic leather and scorched resin greeted him like an old friend. He adjusted the seat, slightly off alignment, and placed his fingers over the manual control relay. His touch wasn't hurried. It was reverent. The digital diagnostic display flickered back the same red alerts. System loop error. Ground sync failure. But Hawk didn't look at the screen. He closed his eyes. Listened. Like a stethoscope over a heartbeat. He moved his hand across the console, listening for vibrations, subtle inconsistencies. Then he opened the maintenance hatch under the console and began rewiring manually. Is he seriously rewiring without protocol? Someone whispered from below. Hawk ignored them. He traced the ground loop backward, old-school analog style, bypassing the digital grid. The jet's current engineers had been using top-down system analytics, but Hawk knew better. You had to listen from the ground up. The jet wasn't rejecting commands. It was rejecting language it didn't recognize, new updates written over an old architecture. After 15 minutes he found it, a tiny solder joint, at the edge of the primary grounding harness. Hairline crack, probably missed during retrofitting. He smiled softly. Without a word, he pulled out a micro-soldering tool from his belt pouch and braced the joint, sealing it with near-surgical precision. From below, Lively sneered. Hope you brought a magic wand too. Suddenly the F-16 let out a beep. The cockpit lights blinked once, then twice. The hydraulic system hissed gently, soft, restrained, before leveling into a steady hum. The hangar froze. Hawk looked up at the display. The red alerts? Gone. Green flickers now pulsed across the main board. Impossible, someone muttered. Jordan Lively took a step forward. Wait, what did you just? I listened, Hawk replied, stepping down from the ladder. Not to the software, to the plane. Colonel Redman rushed forward, confusion battling authority on his face. How? What did you? Hawk reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded note, and handed it over. I wrote this protocol in '91. It's not in your system logs because it wasn't public. Classified override for-loop cascade errors. Someone tried layering modern firmware over a legacy core. It caused a rejection feedback. She stalled herself out for safety. Redman looked between the note and the now purring jet. You're saying this entire failure was a software mismatch? Hawk nodded, and a cracked solder joint. Stunned silence. Then, the unmistakable sound of polished shoes striking concrete. The Pentagon rep had arrived. Slim, dark suit, clipboard in hand. A voice like ice. What's happening here, he asked, surveying the room. Why is this jet humming when the report said dead system? Redman straightened up instantly. We had a breakthrough. Our diagnostics team uncovered a firmware issue. The rep narrowed his eyes. Diagnostics team? Who's running this? A pause. All eyes slowly turned to Hawk, standing by the ladder, wiping his hands with a rag. The rep's gaze followed, then fixed on Hawk's jacket. His eyes widened slightly, just enough to betray recognition. You, he whispered more to himself than anyone. Hawk said nothing. He merely nodded once, slowly. The rep turned sharply to Redman. I need to speak with him. Alone. Now. And just before they exited the hangar, the rep glanced at Hawk again and added, You're not supposed to be here. We buried that name. Hidden files, redacted missions, and a name that vanished from military archives. The Pentagon official led Hawk into a restricted briefing room, just off Hangar 7. No windows. Soundproofed. The kind of room where truths were too dangerous to be seen in daylight. The door shut behind them with a soft click that seemed to echo longer than it should have. The man, who introduced himself simply as Agent Rourke, stood stiff, scanning Hawk's face like he was looking through layers of time. I read about you, he finally said, placing a thin tablet on the steel table between them. But the version I read ended in '99, after Desert Storm. It said you took a consultancy role and retired with honors. No controversies, no court documents. Clean fade. Hawk said nothing. His silence wasn't resistance. It was dignity. Rourke turned the tablet around and tapped it. Problem is, none of your original credentials show up in the current DoD database. They're buried. Redacted beyond top secret level. The only reason I even recognized your name is because my father flew under you, said you saved him over Baghdad in a bird that was supposed to crash. Hawk's eyes finally lifted. A glint of something deep flickered behind them. Your father flew the 82A Falcon, tail end of the thunderstorm. Rourke nodded, stunned. Yeah, that was him. I reprogrammed the vector compensator from a service bay in Riyadh. Hawk said, his voice soft. The tech back then couldn't handle electromagnetic fluctuations in low-density altitudes. The engineers tried to blame pilot error. I built the override that brought him home. Rourke sat down, slowly. Jesus. Then silence. Just the sound of institutional air conditioning humming through ducts. Back at Central Systems, a civilian researcher named Alicia Tran had been assigned to compile a Pentagon incident report on the Edwards Base anomaly. Her task was routine: cross-reference personnel performance, check incident logs, and report any high-risk red flags. But when she typed Curtis Hawkins into the archival database, she hit a brick wall. Access denied. Level clearance. Ultra-confidential. See Defense Directive PHX-1. She blinked. PHX-12 was a dead classification, used for programs long buried in Cold War shadows. Out of curiosity, she ran a backdoor audit using pre-declassification satellite logs from the early 90s. A tag kept appearing beside Hawk's deployments. Project Phoenix Override. Her heart skipped. The name sounded mythic, almost like a legend passed around in skunkworks circles. She called Rourke immediately. Sir, we've got a ghost in your hangar. Rourke, now visibly rattled, pulled up a side file on his secure laptop. The file contained fragments, images of Hawk's original service records, commendations, prototype designs, but they had all been altered. His name replaced. The work credited to junior officers who barely had clearance to access those systems at the time. Then came the most damning discovery. A line in an internal disciplinary report. Following unauthorized testimony in a legal matter, Specialist Curtis Hawkins is no longer recommended for advancement. Limit public exposure. Below it in bold red font. Redacted by order of Defense Oversight Panel. Rourke looked at Hawk again. They didn't just forget you, he said quietly. They erased you. Back in Hangar 7, word of Hawk's temporary presence had spread. Engineers were buzzing, but not all with admiration. Jordan Lively muttered to a colleague, "We're really going to let a janitor screw with federal diagnostics? What if he fried something?" But Tyler Collins, one of the youngest avionics engineers on the base, didn't laugh. He'd watched Hawk work that morning. Watched the precision, the calm, the confidence that no simulation could teach. Collins began digging. He pulled up archived flight logs, technical briefs, and diagnostics from earlier builds of the Falcon series. Hawk's patterns were unmistakable. His coding syntax, his fail-safe routines, his diagnostic logic. It was all still in use. They just didn't know whose fingerprints they were working with. And when Collins came across the Phoenix override schematic buried in a decommissioned server, he gasped. "Holy hell," he whispered. He wrote this. He looked back toward the hangar doors where Hawk had disappeared hours earlier. Something didn't add up. Meanwhile, Rourke and Hawk returned to the control bay near the aircraft. Hawk looked out over the F-16 like a man greeting an old friend he once buried. "I want a supervised rebuild test," he said firmly. "No interference. Just diagnostics. I'll run it analog. That way if there's interference in the software, we'll hear it." Redman objected immediately. "That's not protocol." Rourke cut him off. "That's not the point anymore." Rourke turned to Hawk. "If you're right, and this jet wasn't just misdiagnosed but sabotaged, then this isn't about protocol, it's about containment." Hawk nodded. "Then let me contain it." Hawk was granted 4 hours of supervised access, with Collins assigned as his direct support. The two men worked side by side with minimal conversation, but a growing sense of mutual understanding. Collins watched every move like it was sacred. Hawk didn't just check systems, he felt them. His fingers ran across wires, his ears trained for echoes no machine would detect. He bypassed the jet's onboard diagnostics and created a closed-circuit analog test system using copper wire and external feedback loops. And then he stopped. "There," he said, pointing to a corner of the aircraft's comms relay box. Collins knelt beside him. "What is it?" "This isn't factory solder," Hawk murmured. This was replaced recently. Collins checked the seal. It was logged during last week's update. Run the trace pattern. Hawk ordered. Collins did. And the screen pulsed with a signature loop. One that rerouted internal data back into the mainframe under a false identifier. A ghost signal. Hawk stood. His face darkened. That's not just a mistake, he said. That's intentional. Collins looked up. You think someone tried to crash it? No, Hawk replied coldly. Worse. Someone tried to make sure it failed only when the Pentagon showed up. From the far end of the hangar, a high-ranking officer stepped into view. Someone no one had seen during the rebuild. His face tense, his voice low. You were never supposed to see that, Hawkins. Before the medals, before the wars, he was just a kid with oil-stained fingers and a dream. Curtis Hawkins grew up on the outer edge of Selma, Alabama, just past the rail yard, where the gravel cracked into red clay and the houses leaned like they were tired of standing. His street, like most in that part of town, didn't have sidewalks, just a dirt path worn down by generations of feet walking to school, work, or nowhere at all. But across that path, just beyond the broken fence of an abandoned pecan grove, sat an old forgotten airstrip once used to train World War II pilots. Now it was overrun with weeds, grass busting through the concrete, and rusted fuel tanks collapsed like drunk sentries. Most of the neighborhood boys used it as a playground, racing stolen bikes or lighting bottle rockets. Curtis used it as a classroom. He'd sneak out at dawn, carrying a rusted toolbox and a spiral notebook filled with scribbled diagrams. Every sound from the hollow shells of downed planes told him something. When the wind blew through a busted fuselage, he listened to the frequency. When birds nested in old cockpits, he took note of insulation patterns. And when he found an abandoned radio transmitter in the belly of a C-47, he spent 3 weeks fixing it with wires he stripped from a broken toaster. By the time he was 12, he'd built a makeshift remote control plane from tin siding, lawnmower parts, and the salvaged rotor from a busted ceiling fan. The kids called it the bird that shouldn't fly. But it flew twice, before it crashed into the power lines. He didn't cry. He just rebuilt it. His parents, Harold and Lena Hawkins, both worked full-time, Harold as a mechanic for farm equipment, and Lena as a nurse at the segregated hospital across town. They didn't always understand his obsession with planes, but they understood why he needed it. Some boys get dreams to escape, his father once told him. But you, Curtis, you got a dream to fight gravity. He aced his way through school. Not because he had tutors or resources, but because he couldn't afford to fail. The colored school had barely functioning equipment, and their science lab was really just a shelf with beakers and 2 microscopes that didn't magnify. Still, Curtis worked with what he had. By 15, he had built a functional drone prototype from spare parts, complete with rudimentary camera feed and a home-wired remote guidance system. He sent it flying over the cotton fields, capturing grainy footage of old barns and tractors. His teachers submitted it to a regional science fair, but the judges misplaced the application before it made it to nationals. No one ever said it aloud. But they didn't have to. At 17, Curtis applied to the United States Air Force Academy. His test scores were flawless, his recommendation letters glowing, but when the rejection arrived, it came with a line no one would ever forget. We regret to inform you that your profile does not meet our desired diversity of experience. It was code. His family was devastated, but not defeated. Within weeks, local civil rights activists and a retired Tuskegee airman caught wind of Curtis's story. A small but fiery campaign began. They lobbied, they wrote letters, they met with congressmen, and 2 months later, the academy changed its mind. He entered as one of only 6 black cadets in his class. The academy didn't try to break Curtis with hazing. They tried to break him with invisibility. He was nicknamed Shadow by his fellow cadets. Not because he moved silently, but because they claimed he was there but not worth noticing. When questions were posed in classes, he was passed over. When partners were assigned, he was left standing. And when projects were presented, his were critiqued with phrases like, interesting, but unconventional. But silence wasn't defeat. He taught himself, stayed late in labs others avoided, pulled blueprints from archives the instructors forgot existed. By his second year, he was outperforming students with family aviation legacies and senators for parents. When it came time for diagnostics and avionics application testing, Curtis not only aced the simulation, he improved it. His professors were stunned when he demonstrated a real-time fault detection module he coded himself, allowing for in-flight system correction without reboot. He was offered an internship with a private defense contractor. He declined. Back in the present, the hangar buzzed with restrained electricity. Word of the sabotage-level anomaly had not yet spread outside the inner circle, but those close enough to the system logs felt the shift in gravity. Something was off, far beyond a broken jet. A pattern of silencing, exclusion, and quiet manipulation was now dancing on the edge of exposure. Curtis had just finished sealing the exposed comms relay when a voice came over the intercom. "Mr. Hawkins, please report to room B12. Pentagon liaison, requesting private audience." Collins gave him a worried look. "You good?" Curtis gave a slight nod, wiping his hands with a cloth. "I've had harder interviews." As he made his way toward the administrative corridor, every step echoed like it was testing the floor. The hall was colder here, less mechanical, more institutional, the kind of sterile that erases memory on purpose. He entered room B12 and found Agent Rourke waiting, tablet in hand, but his expression was different this time. Not analytical, not cautious, troubled. Rourke didn't waste time. He slid the tablet across the table. "I just got off the call with Washington," he said, eyes locked. "They know you're here. They didn't authorize it, and they're not happy." Curtis didn't flinch. "They weren't happy when I testified either." Rourke nodded grimly. "They've flagged the override discovery as internal compromise. They think you're using this to reopen what they call settled grievances." Curtis leaned forward. "It was never settled. It was buried." Rourke hesitated, then asked, "Why come back now? Why this jet?" Curtis answered without pause, "Because I knew it was talking, and nobody was listening." Before Rourke could respond, his earpiece buzzed. He turned away slightly, listening. Then his eyes sharpened. "We've got movement," he muttered. He turned back to Hawk. "Your presence just triggered an internal audit alert." Curtis raised a brow. "On who?" Rourke exhaled slowly. "Not you." He tapped the screen, rotating it to show 3 names. One of them Chief Engineer Darren Matheson. Rourke locked eyes with Curtis. "You weren't the only one they tried to erase, but you might be the only one still standing. You built the system, they buried your name, and now they need you again." The door to room B12 clicked shut behind them, the heavy mechanical latch echoing through the thick walls like the final bolt on a tomb. The air inside was tense, sterile with purpose. No window, no distractions, just 2 men, history folding quietly between them. Agent Rourke didn't sit immediately. He paced slowly, near the long table, his mind visibly working, as his eyes flicked over the screen of the secure tablet in his hand. Hawk sat already, composed, spine straight like someone still accustomed to uniform inspection posture. "I called my father last night," Rourke said suddenly, his voice quieter than before. "Told him your name. He didn't even let me finish the sentence." Hawk raised a brow, waiting. "He said that man saved my life with a screwdriver, a pencil, and a prayer." Rourke paused, looking over. "He flew the 82A over Kuwait. Your override system rerouted his navigation after both his comms and telemetry failed. They had him marked for recovery. Then he landed without a scratch." "I remember," Hawk replied softly, the corners of his eyes hardening with a memory that was both pride and pain. "He was scared, but smart. Followed my code to the digit." Rourke sat down. Finally. The screen between them went dark as the encryption timed out. He didn't bother reviving it yet. "Washington's getting nervous," he said. "You're not just a ghost now. You're a variable." "They don't like variables." Curtis leaned forward slightly. "Then maybe they should have built a system that didn't rely on forgetting its own creators." There was a long silence. Then Rourke offered the olive branch. "Here's what I can do," he said. "If you agree to assist with full diagnostic reconstruction, publicly, I'll push to have your record reinstated. Not just your name restored. Commendations, rank, and a formal apology from the Department of Defense." Hawk's expression didn't change. His hands rested calmly on the table. "I don't need that," he said evenly. Rourke frowned. "Excuse me, I'm not here for a ceremony. I'm here because someone tried to make that jet fail in front of Congress. And the only thing worse than sabotage is the silence that follows it." Rourke leaned back. "Then, what do you want?" "Access," Hawk said, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "I want to build a new diagnostic model, outside of their corrupted architecture. I'll need full analog integration. And I want Collins. 2 other engineers. Young ones. Fresh enough to still question things. You'll have to work under the chief engineer. Rourke warned. No, Hawk replied sharply. I'll work under the system, not the men who poisoned it. Rourke studied him. The intensity, the calm fury, the earned confidence of a man who didn't want vindication. Only integrity. Finally, he nodded. Unofficially, you'll lead the tech assessment. Officially, you're a civilian contractor on temporary clearance. And when this is over? Hawk asked. Rourke met his eyes. We talk again. A strange peace passed between them. Not trust, but respect. That afternoon, Hawk returned to Hangar 7 with new authorization. A digital badge clipped loosely to his jacket, the color of it clearly distinguishing him as non-essential to those who chose to read it that way. Collins met him at the rear stairwell, eyes wide with restrained excitement. You're really leading this? He asked. No, Hawk said with a faint smile. You are. I'm just whispering in the system's ear. Collins grinned, unsure if it was a joke. They're not gonna like that. They're not supposed to. 2 other engineers joined them. Maya Bennett, a 29-year-old avionics analyst from New Mexico, sharp-eyed and detail-obsessed, and Reggie West, 32, from Chicago, known for turning broken systems into benchmarks. Neither said much, but the moment Hawk shook their hands, something shifted. They'd heard the stories. Now they were walking into one. Inside the hangar, the atmosphere felt different, quieter. Eyes followed Hawk from every corner. Some of the engineers nodded cautiously. Others looked away, unable to mask their resentment. Chief Engineer Matheson stood near the nose of the jet, arms folded, watching. He's got clearance now, he said to Redman. Clearly agitated. He's got results, Redman muttered. Matheson's jaw tightened. You're letting him run diagnostics outside the digital loop. Redman nodded once. Clipped. We've tried everything else. Matheson stepped forward, voice low but firm. You know what happens if he finds something we missed. You realize what it'll look like? Redman didn't blink. It'll look like we found the problem. That's all anyone above our pay grade cares about. Matheson's eyes flicked toward Hawk, who was already wiring up his own analog setup on a side bench, using tools so outdated most young engineers wouldn't recognize them. Behind Matheson, an older tech whispered something. Quiet. We can't let him win. But Hawk wasn't listening to whispers. He was listening to the jet. Wires spread like roots from his custom rig to the Falcon's exposed panels. No interference from central command. No real-time auto-corrections. Just raw data, interpreted by a man who'd spent his life speaking the language no manual ever taught. Reggie handled the feedback monitor. Maya fed power through an external converter. Collins tracked frequency drift. Hawk knelt beside the relay module, fingers feeling the warmth beneath the cold. Something's hiding, he murmured. Collins moved closer. The loop? No, Hawk said. This jet's not just rejecting bad code. It's rerouting logic through a secondary loop, one that wasn't built into the factory system. You're saying someone added a new architecture? Maya asked, wide-eyed. Hawk nodded. And they buried it inside an emergency failover. Reggie frowned. Why would anyone do that? Hawk stood up slowly, to make it look like it failed, without proving it was sabotaged. Collins swallowed. That's genius. And evil. Hawk said nothing. He walked around the Falcon once more, his hand brushing gently along the panel like a priest tracing symbols on a sacred wall. He could feel it. A pattern. Not just an error. A message. From the upper deck, Matheson watched, phone to his ear. His voice low, venomous. He's getting too close. Pull the backup logs. Now, it wasn't a malfunction. It was a message. The hangar lights buzzed overhead like gnats circling a secret. The jet sat there, still and silent. But its silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of failure. It was the silence of something waiting to be revealed. Hawk felt it in his bones. Inside the makeshift diagnostic room they'd been granted, Curtis stood over a wall-sized screen, lined with cascading lines of code, fragments of firmware logs they'd pulled from the F-16's last 5 system failures. Maya and Reggie worked to align them chronologically, while Collins analyzed byte patterns through his custom-built anomaly scanner. At first glance the logs looked clean. Too clean. No chaos, no data loss, no loops out of range. But that was the problem. No living system is this tidy. Hawk muttered. If your heart monitor reads perfect rhythm 24/7, something's lying. Reggie looked up from the logs. They're cloned. You think? More like overwritten. Maya replied, adjusting her glasses. Certain command paths repeat exactly every few milliseconds. System didn't glitch. It was forced into predictable behavior. Hawk nodded. To the Pentagon, it looks like a tech failure. But to us, it's surgical, Collins finished. Someone coded this failure like they were painting over a crime scene. The more they peeled back the layers, the uglier it got. Embedded deep within the Falcon's last startup sequence was a line of logic that didn't belong. It looked like standard protocol for emergency shutdown, something the FAA would never question. But when Reggie cross-checked it against older system logs, the difference became glaring. This line redirects the override away from pilot control, he said. It bypasses manual recovery. Hawk leaned in. Meaning even if the pilot knows something's wrong, he can't save the jet. Only someone from the ground could, Maya added, voice trembling slightly. They stared at each other, all color draining from their faces. Meanwhile, in the far wing of the hangar, Chief Engineer Darren Matheson paced his private office like a man watching the walls close in. On his screen, backup logs had just been requested by name, under Hawk's temporary clearance. He picked up the phone, voice low. He's in the logs. Already running comparison scans. Pull whatever copies are on the public server. Now, on the other end, silence. Matheson added coldly, if they find that loop, it's not just sabotage. It's intentional compromise. I don't go down alone. He ended the call, then sat in his chair, eyes locked on the old brass photo frame beside his desk. It showed him from 15 years ago, back when he was a junior engineer on Project Eclipse, standing beside a younger Hawk, smiling, just before Hawk's prototype got all the attention and Matheson got none. Even now, the photo burned. Back in the diagnostics bay, Maya found the name buried inside the metadata of the sabotage line. Whoever inserted this used a spoofed credential, she said, but the timestamp, it's tied to a maintenance override done last Thursday. 6:42 a.m. Collins turned pale. That's the same time Matheson did his routine pre-check. Remember? He locked down the hangar, said it was for security protocol. Hawk didn't blink. So the man who told the Pentagon I couldn't be trusted is the one who sabotaged their showcase jet. He wanted it to fail, Reggie said quietly. With you on base, that way you'd wear the blame. Flashbacks pulsed through Hawk's mind like a sting. Years earlier, when he unveiled the prototype of the adaptive flight control algorithm, Matheson, then a rising star, had lobbied to lead the project. But command gave it to Hawk. After that, the praise dried up. Matheson was sidelined. Word spread that he began pushing cultural cohesion arguments during internal reviews, coded racism disguised as team dynamics. Hawk had seen it before. Talent punished. Insecurity rewarded. And now it was back. Wearing a cleaner suit. Don't confront him yet, Hawk said, voice steady. Let him think we're just fixing things. We don't show our hand until the jet's operational. Then we make sure the right eyes see it. You're not mad? Maya asked. I've been mad, Hawk replied. Now I'm focused. The next morning, Hawk began recalibrating the jet's power distribution manually. No automatic processors, no remote syncing. Just analog rebalancing, restoring the Falcon's breathing pattern from the inside out. He moved like a man tuning an instrument only he could hear. Every wire rewrapped, every terminal reset to baseline voltage. The others watched in silence, sensing they were witnessing something historic. By midday, the jet was ready for live power. Not flight, just startup. Here goes, Collins said, flipping the external circuit switch. The F-16 let out a low hum. Lights blinked to life. Engines idle. All systems green. Applause nearly broke out, until Hawk's hand shot up. Wait. The hum grew louder. Too loud. The readings began spiking. Shut it down, Hawk barked. Too late. A blast of feedback surged through the console, sending sparks across the floor. Reggie dove out of the way. Maya's tablet fried instantly. Collins cursed, pulling the breakers. The jet powered down. Dead silence. Then smoke. And the unmistakable smell of burnt circuitry. Hawk moved like a surgeon through the smoke, pulled open the access panel, and what he saw made his breath hitch. The override. His override had been rewritten again. Someone changed this while I was gone, he said grimly. This isn't even sabotage anymore. What is it then? Maya asked. Hawk stared at the charred panel. It's war. From the upper floor, a security camera blinked red. Someone was watching and recording. then deleting. Everything worked until the system turned against itself. Hangar 7 had never been this full. Rows of folding chairs lined the central observation platform, where Pentagon officials, defense contractors, and base command officers took their seats. Media wasn't allowed inside yet, but murmurs hinted that cameras might roll if the test went well. Everyone present had a stake in the outcome. Everyone wanted to see the bird fly. It wasn't a real flight test, just a high simulation systems demonstration. A heartbeat run. But for the Falcon, it was do or die. The past week had exposed cracks not just in the jet's shell, but in the base's culture. And Curtis Hawkins was the most controversial man in the room. Standing in his patched USAF jacket beside Collins, Reggie and Maya, Hawk scanned the crowd. Redman avoided eye contact. Matheson leaned near the back wall, arms folded, smirking just enough to be noticed. And near the front, Agent Rourke stood with his hands in his pockets, shoulders tight with tension. The lights dimmed. The intercom crackled. Simulation test initiating stage 1. Hawk gave Collins a nod. Let's light her up. Collins activated the primary power sequence. The jet's engines clicked to life, hum swelling through the hangar. Systems lit green across the board. There were no sparks, no glitches, just a steady, flawless rise of internal operations. Then came the applause. Small at first, a ripple of cautious approval, then louder. Redman leaned into his comm unit. So far, so good. The Falcon's diagnostics began running through simulated flight conditions, elevation pressure, rudder control, speed integration. Screens around the room displayed the results in real time. Every number gleamed, until it didn't. 90 seconds into simulated flight mode, the nose wheel subsystem blinked amber, then red. Hawk's stomach sank. He stepped forward fast. Cut the simulation, he barked. Collins looked stunned. Sir, protocol says wait. Shut it down, Hawk repeated. His voice now cut through the room. Maya's screen showed violent internal software fluctuation. The nose gear began to tilt out of alignment. Only digitally. But if this had been a real run, the bird would be skidding sideways down a live tarmac. Matheson stepped forward, face flushed. This isn't your call, Hawkins. Step back. I built the override, Hawk snapped. If we wait, it'll corrupt the auxiliary systems. We follow protocol. Matheson started. Protocol's rigged. Hawk shot back. Pull the power. Collins hesitated. Reggie reached for the main switch. Then Matheson lunged forward, hand smacking down on the console. You touch that, and you're out. All of you.
Hawk didn't flinch.
He moved in front of Reggie, eyes locked on Matheson. Then fire me. But not before you pull this damn plug. The tension in the hangar thickened. Officers stood from their seats. Rourke began moving toward the platform. But before anyone else could speak, the system flickered, then surged. The Falcon emitted a mechanical grind, its landing gear sensors now blinking in total failure. Collins shouted, "We're losing comm-sync. It's trying to override itself." Maya cried out, "This isn't just a glitch. This is a trap loop. It's reactivating the sabotage protocol."
That was enough.
Rourke stepped in, voice sharp as a blade. "Hawkins, do it. Now." With one swipe, Hawk slammed the emergency cutoff. The entire hangar fell silent. Monitors blacked out. The Falcon's hum died into a ghostly echo. Chaos followed in the form of stunned silence. The kind that doesn't explode. It collapses. Matheson turned on Rourke, seething. "You've let him destroy federal property based on hunches." Rourke pulled a folded document from his coat. "This authorization gives Hawkins final say on emergency shutoff protocols during classified demonstrations."
You went behind my back? Redman asked, voice low.
Rourke didn't blink. We were already behind. As crews scrambled to assess the Falcon's power down, Hawk leaned over the console and examined the final system timestamp. Same ghost line, he whispered to himself. Same internal override rewrote. But this time, it broke its own code. Reggie stepped beside him. Meaning someone tampered with my fix after I left last night. Meanwhile, Collins, still pale, reviewed auxiliary server logs. And that's when he saw it, an unauthorized login. Time-stamped 2:43 a.m. The access key had been masked, but the route it took went through the private engineering server, the one reserved only for command-level access. He pulled Hawk aside. "I found something. A shadow access used to rewrite your power grid parameters. It came from the director's login shell." Matheson, Hawk said flatly. No one else has that level of access. Before Hawk could respond, Rourke's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, then stiffened. Slowly, he turned to face Hawk. You're going to want to hear this. He put the phone on speaker. The voice on the line was female. Military sharp. This is Major Owens. Internal investigations. We pulled surveillance logs from last night's systems bay, and we found something buried in the deleted cache.
A click, then static, then audio.
Let the jet fail. Let the old man take the fall. That's the only way this place stays ours. The voice was unmistakable. Matheson. The room froze. Matheson stepped back slowly, color draining from his face. That's out of context. Rourke turned to him coldly. You said that last night, after logging into Hawkins' override shell. I was protecting protocol. You were covering your tracks, Hawk said quietly, and you almost killed a system designed to save lives just to bury mine. Redman looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Is this true? Matheson didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked out of the hangar in silence. Hawk stared at the dark Falcon. So close, so very close. But this wasn't the win. Not yet. There was still one more test left. And the bird wasn't finished talking. As the hangar lights flickered back to life, Collins received a new data packet via encrypted channel. He opened it. Inside was a private unsent video message from Matheson, timestamped to 2 weeks before the jet even failed for the first time. Let the jet fail. Then maybe they'll stop hiring janitors to do engineers' work. The room was soundproof, secure, sterile, but nothing inside it could prepare them for the weight of what they were about to hear. 3 Pentagon officials sat at the end of the long oval table. Beside them, 2 internal investigators from DoD oversight. Across from them sat Colonel Redman, his posture ramrod straight but his complexion pale. Next to him, Agent Rourke leaned forward, hands folded, face unreadable. Collins stood behind him, eyes locked on the screen. And at the far edge, silent and grounded as always, was no press, no rank insignia. Just truths waiting to be spoken aloud. A technician entered and slid a drive across the table to the lead Pentagon official, who inserted it into the wall port. The screen blinked, then filled with the grainy image of Matheson's office, caught from an angle slightly behind the overhead light. He was alone, talking into what looked like a private video log device, unaware he'd triggered a duplicate security cache. He spoke in a low, mocking tone. Let the jet fail. Then maybe they'll stop hiring janitors to do engineers' work. A bitter pause. They want a black legacy project. Let it burn on their watch. The silence afterward was loud. Colonel Redman inhaled slowly, like someone watching their own roof collapse. Is there more? One of the Pentagon officials asked. The technician nodded. The screen jumped to another clip. This one time-stamped even earlier. Matheson reviewing Hawk's override logs. If he fixes this, I'll be the one erased. I've worked 20 years for that chair. I won't lose it to a ghost with medals and a mop. When the screen went black, no one spoke. The shame in the room moved like heat, so thick it burned. Rourke broke the silence. We believe he inserted the corrupted firmware protocol weeks before the Falcon's first public test. The damage was meant to be subtle, progressive, just enough to push the bird into consistent failure. The lead official looked to Redman. And you had no knowledge of this? Redman's voice cracked slightly. None. He hesitated. I believed Matheson was protecting the program. Hawk finally spoke. You weren't protecting anything, he said calmly. You were managing an image. Same as always. Everyone turned to him. His voice didn't rise, but it cut straight through. And for the record, he looked at Redman. Steady. The note you found under your door, the one that said, let me fix it. Just once. That was yours. I copied your handwriting, because I knew you wouldn't listen to mine. Redman blinked, stunned. You forged mine. No, Hawk said. I translated it into a language your ego would recognize. Matheson was officially removed from command later that day. Not arrested yet, but suspended indefinitely pending federal investigation for attempted sabotage of government equipment and conspiracy rooted in racial bias. The base responded like any wounded institution, not with unity, but with division. Some engineers walked the halls with their heads low, ashamed of the silence they kept. Others muttered quietly in break rooms, claiming Hawk had played the race card or weaponized history. A few transferred out within 48 hours. But the younger ones, the ones who watched Hawk bring the jet back to life, who saw him risk his dignity and legacy to save a system that rejected him. They began to whisper a different kind of story. The story of the janitor who rewired the sky. Inside the newly reassigned diagnostics lab, Rourke sat with Hawk, offering him a folder thick with reinstatement documents. Full honors, clearance, public recognition, a formal leadership role overseeing avionics R&D. He slid it closer. You deserve it. Hawk didn't touch it. I didn't come here for redemption, he said. I came to finish the job. Rourke tilted his head. Then finish it with your name restored. Hawk stood, picked up the folder, then turned it around and slid it back. Give the role to Collins, he said. He listens, and he's not afraid to learn from a man like me. Rourke looked surprised. You'd trust him with your legacy? Hawk gave a small, tired smile. It was never mine to keep. Only mine to pass on. He walked out without another word. In the hangar, Collins approached the Falcon, like it was breathing again. Systems cleared, loop stable. For the first time in months, the bird was ready. Hawk joined him at the wing. We'll finish this, Collins said. No, Hawk replied, placing a hand on the jet's frame. You will. Later that afternoon, as sunlight cast long shadows across the runway, a buzz echoed across the base. Phones chimed. Notifications lit up. A single headline broke through the noise. Sabotage at Edwards. Legendary black veteran saves jet amidst internal conspiracy. It had leaked. The recording. The story. The image of Hawk standing beneath the Falcon. Silent and resolute. News vans lined the base entrance within the hour. Just as Hawk prepared to leave the hangar, an officer handed him a classified envelope, stamped in red, top secret, declassified Phoenix override files. Inside, a single note. We lied about more than your name. They called him a janitor. The Pentagon calls him a savior. By prime time that evening, Hawk's story was everywhere. Opening with the words, "This is the man who fixed a $30 million F-16 that top engineers said couldn't be saved." The national news anchor recounted the scandal that rattled the Pentagon and an entire military base. Behind her, footage showed Hawk kneeling beside the jet, soldering iron in hand, calm and precise amid chaos. Then the sit-down interview began. An elegant set, muted tones, social context creeping into every frame. The interviewer, Rachel Moreno, leaned forward, intensity in her voice. You used to be a janitor here, she said. Now you're the man who saved the jet they said was dead. Hawk's eyes didn't waver. They called me a janitor, he replied softly. I never stopped being an engineer. His tone wasn't defensive. It was matter of fact. He spoke of being erased from records, of surveillance logs, of sabotage tied to racism. But let's be clear, he said, voice steady. This wasn't just about a plane. It was about who gets to be heard, who gets to be valued. The segment cut to clips of the viral hangar footage. Hawk rewiring sections of the F-16 manually, ignoring digital diagnostics to trust muscle memory and intuition. Close-ups of soot-scarred solder joints. Young engineers watching with awe. Viewers across the country paused their dinners. Social media lit up. Fix it like Hawk trended within hours. Hundreds of thousands of posts. Teens posted DIY drone repairs. Young black mechanics filmed themselves testing vintage radios. High schools hosted discussions on the legacy of unsung heroes in STEM fields. Kids tagged Hawk in their tweets saying, "Show us how, sir." Later on that evening, Stephen Colton's late-night show showcased clips of the news segment. The janitor who fixed the Pentagon's bird, he joked. But when Hawk's calm voice replayed, the laughter died. Colton ended with, "This isn't comedy, this is legacy." Meanwhile, back at Edwards, Team Collins, Maya and Reggie included, prepared for the final test. Under Hawk's supervision, every bolt was checked, every feedback loop monitored. The override patch reinstalled and revalidated. Every ground power conduit aligned. This time, the test was scripted as a live fly run, not simulation, a real takeoff from the runway, but tethered safety disabled, the jet fueled, clearance given for a full circuit. Engineers, Pentagon liaisons, and press representatives watched from distance. Hawk observed quietly, standing near Collins, green authorization badge, still clipped to his jacket, even though the Pentagon had offered public restoration, which he declined again. You ready? Collins whispered. Hawk nodded once. You carry it. At precisely 08:45 the next morning, a ground crew gave the final hand signal. Collins raised the command. The Falcon's turbines roared alive. The jet taxied forward, shaking the earth beneath it, unwavering. Lights blinked green all the way down. After the runway's halfway point, it lifted, slender wings, slicing air, a wide arc over the base, banking carefully, then leveling, straight as a line drawn by a ruler. Radio chatter crackled. Flight systems check. All green. Telemetry stable. Override hooks engaged. The jet touched down smoothly. Silence filled the runway. Then came applause. First tentative, then thunderous. Engineers cheered. Reporters hooted. Pentagon reps exchanged resigned glances. Redman approached Hawk as the crowd began to disperse. "Sir," he said, "you saved it. All of us." Hawk nodded. "You had a system built without listening to the builder." That afternoon, Moreno's news desk aired footage of the jet in flight, edited with prior clips of Hawk's work. Emotional testimonies from young black airmen, followed up in subsequent spots, saying how Hawk's quiet knowledge inspired them. Newspapers ran headlines like "Black Genius Behind the Jet That Wouldn't Die" and "They Called Him Janitor, Now He's Symbol." A particularly moving tweet showed a young boy holding a schematics book with the hashtag "Tonight I Learned Hawks Don't Apologize for Knowing How the Sky is Supposed to Hum." Schools began scheduling speaker sessions. STEM groups requested interviews. Mentorship platforms offered to support his outreach. And then came the invite, an official letter from the Air Force Academy, delivered by courier that afternoon. Curtis Hawk Hawkins is hereby invited to deliver the commencement keynote address at the United States Air Force Academy's next graduating class ceremony, and to serve as honorary faculty in innovation and legacy studies. Hawk held the letter quietly, absorbing it. Collins peered over. "That's your spot," he said softly. Hawk looked at the invitation, then gazed at the Falcon resting under the afternoon light. The swaggering applause of the hangar still echoed in his mind. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his pocket, not because he didn't appreciate it, but because this was bigger than any honor. Late that night, Hawk got one more delivery, a sealed DVD, labeled Phoenix Protocol, Original Files. No note, no return address. As he stared at its plain label, his phone buzzed. Another message, from an unknown sender.
"They used your tech for war games. Without you knowing."
I was trained to be quiet. But silence never fixed a jet. The United States Air Force Academy's main auditorium was packed wall to wall. Every cadet seat filled. Faculty in full dress, officers from around the country, seated in hushed anticipation, banners hung high with messages of honor and legacy. On stage, an empty podium waited under bright white lights. But the room didn't buzz with the usual pomp of graduation speeches. No one shuffled or whispered. Everyone waited. Curtis Hawk Hawkins stood in the wings, not in a suit or dress blues, but in the same patched USAF jacket he wore the day the Falcon finally flew. The fabric held too much truth for polish, the weight of the seams too sacred to iron out. A junior officer offered him a wireless mic. Hawk looked at it, then shook his head. "I'll use the podium," he said quietly. "No performance, just presence." He stepped forward. The audience rose instinctively, not because of rank, but because of reverence. Hawk didn't wave, didn't smile wide or stall for effect. He placed both hands on the podium, leaned forward slightly, and began. "I was trained to be quiet," he said. The auditorium hushed even deeper. "I was trained to do my job, speak only when spoken to, and wait for permission to lead. And for a while, that worked. I rose through the ranks by being excellent and invisible." He paused. His eyes scanned the rows of young cadets, some barely 20, wide-eyed, frozen, but silence never fixed a jet. A soft ripple of emotion passed through the crowd. He continued, his voice steady, without theatrics. "I was told that if I stayed in my lane, worked harder than everyone else, and didn't make noise about what I saw, I'd be okay." He looked up. "I wasn't." He told them about his designs, the tech that flew missions without his name attached, the prototypes rebranded, the inventions rewritten, the whisper campaigns, the promotion that never came, the desk that slowly moved toward the janitor's closet. "But what they forgot," he said, his tone still calm but cutting now, "was that I never did it for applause. I did it because I loved the birds. And I heard them when no one else would listen." Gasps were audible when he recounted how the F-16 was sabotaged. He didn't mention Matheson by name. He didn't have to. The cadets knew the story. Everyone did. It was in every publication, from the Washington Post to Popular Mechanics. He paused then, and for a long moment, just stood in silence. I stand here not because I outmaneuvered racism, he said finally. I stand here because I refuse to give it the final say. He let the words settle. Being excellent while black comes at a cost. Sometimes that cost is being doubted, or dismissed, or disappeared. But it's not your burden to prove your humanity. It's your mission to never let them redefine it. A cadet in the second row wiped a tear. He closed with no flourish, no metaphors. I fixed the jet, but what I was really trying to fix was belief, yours and mine. Then he stepped back. Silence held for a full breath. Then the room erupted. Not just applause, tears. Cheers. Young cadets rose to their feet, some openly weeping. A few saluted without orders. Others simply clapped until their hands stung. The entire auditorium rose. Not out of obligation, but because their generation had just witnessed something history had tried to suppress. After the speech, Hawk didn't linger backstage. He walked through the cadet halls quietly. A few reached out, asking for advice. Others just thanked him for being visible, for being excellent, for not giving up. A cadet named Carter approached him, shaking slightly. My grandfather. He knew your name, he said. Said he saw you make a fighter jet whisper like it was praying. That Hawk smiled, placing a hand on the cadet's shoulder. No, it was crying. I just listened long enough to hear it stop. The Pentagon, shaken by the national response to the scandal, launched an official internal audit within days of the speech. A new task force was created to investigate systemic racial bias within high-clearance engineering and tactical units. Reports emerged. Old complaints resurfaced. Quiet whispers became statement. Hawk was asked to join the board. He declined. Let the new ones lead, he told Rourke. I've done my share of building. Now I'll help them protect what's built. That evening, back at his quarters near the edge of Edwards, Hawk walked home with the sunset on his shoulders. The hangar lights behind him faded, and the desert wind carried memories he didn't chase anymore. At his door, a small stack of mail waited. Bills. A folded note from a young student in Baltimore. A printed photo of a middle school team who'd built their own drone from a toaster and 3 bike gears, captioned with "Fix it like Hawk." But one envelope stood out. No return address. Official seal. Thick paper. He slid it open carefully. Inside, a single-page document marked declassified in bold at the top, and below it, a title he hadn't seen in over 30 years. Phoenix Override, Original Deployment Application, authorized by C. Hawkins. His breath caught. They had declassified his project. Finally. But something else was tucked into the back. A second sheet. Older. Not part of the official packet. No watermark. Just typewritten text. It read, used for simulations in off-book wargame operations. Unauthorized usage flagged. Technologies expanded without author consent. There was a list. Countries. Locations. Years. He'd never been told. His hands trembled. As Hawk turned to walk inside, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered cautiously. A voice crackling but calm said, Mr. Hawkins, we think you should know. Some of your designs were used in active conflict. Not all of them ended well. They hid his legacy. Now it would echo forever. Curtis Hawkins sat at his small kitchen table. The folder spread open before him like an autopsy report on a part of himself. The air inside the room was still. Even the ceiling fan dared not creak. He hadn't turned on the TV or the radio. He needed silence to hear the betrayal for what it was. The second document, smuggled inside the declassified Phoenix Override folder, contained more than just redacted memos. It was a map of theft. Each page detailed adaptive aerial response modules used in live military simulations between 2004 and 2016. The blueprints were his, down to the line thickness, the screw measurements, even the testing anomalies he once hand-drew during sleepless nights in the Gulf. Except one thing was missing. His name. Every credit tag had been removed or replaced. Revised by J. Templeton. Updated by B. Griggs. Engineers he'd trained. Men who'd once waited for him to approve their schematics. Men who now had careers built on blueprints they didn't design. Millions had been made. Defense contracts, private military deals, even drone production licensing for NATO allies. Curtis ran a weathered finger over a diagram marked Adaptive Stealth Linkage System. Final prototype. He remembered this one. He designed it after seeing a pilot nearly die in a visibility collapse during a sandstorm. The system compensated for blocked sensors using triangulated telemetry. He'd submitted it under emergency review. And then, silence. He pulled a small lockbox from under the kitchen sink. Inside, a faded photo of his wife, Marlene, in her nurse scrubs, smiling, wind pushing her braids into her face. Beside it, a pair of dog tags, a commendation pin, and a note she'd written him years ago. You didn't do it for fame. You did it for the ones who flew too high without a parachute. Marlene had passed away 5 years ago. Cancer. Quick. Quiet. He didn't attend her funeral in uniform. Not out of shame. But because he didn't want to wear the stripes of a system that stripped him bare. Still, her voice lived inside him like a drumbeat. That afternoon, Curtis called someone he hadn't spoken to in 2 decades. Angela Wynn, civil rights attorney out of D.C., now a partner at one of the top justice advocacy firms in the country. She'd represented 2 historic wrongful termination cases involving black federal employees, and both resulted in policy changes. He didn't send a message. He just dialed.
Curtis?
She asked, stunned. It's me, he said. She paused, then said, if this is about that base, I heard. I need you to see something, he said. In person. 3 hours later, she was sitting across from him, flipping through the documents with surgical precision. Her eyes narrowed. Her pen moved swiftly. And by the end of the 4th page, she looked up, her voice calm but heavy. They took your work, she said.
I know.
And not just once. This is systemic. Every update cycle, every file batch. I figured. Angela leaned back, visibly processing. They built an empire using your code, your architecture, your war ethics, then rewrote you out of the story. Hawk said nothing. She tapped the documents. Curtis, this is bigger than credit. He nodded once. I'm not asking for revenge. Just the truth. Angela looked at him carefully. You ready for what that truth might break open? He leaned forward. I've been broken. This is me rebuilding. Angela made 2 phone calls that night. One to her legal team. Another to an investigative journalist who owed her a favor. By morning, she had cross-referenced 4 internal tech proposals submitted by private contractors, each aligned suspiciously with declassified schematics found in Curtis's file. All of them had received Pentagon clearance. None of them had original innovation tags. All had dates prior to public knowledge of the Phoenix override system. Angela closed her laptop and exhaled. This isn't a misattribution, she said. It's erasure by design. Curtis, still in the same chair, looked at her. Then let's redraw the record. The next day, they filed a formal intent to sue notice with the Department of Defense. Angela outlined their claim: intellectual theft, racial discrimination in federal engineering documentation, and willful suppression of authored invention. Curtis didn't ask for damages. He asked for one thing: his name placed in the system logs, where it had been removed. He wanted his fingerprints restored. But Angela wasn't done. That afternoon, after analyzing legal precedent and the internal knowledge suppression shown in the files, she looked at Curtis across the kitchen table. There's enough here, she said, for a Supreme Court case. Hawk didn't flinch. He just blinked once, then asked, how many more like me? Angela closed the folder gently. Maybe too many to count. Just as she packed up to leave, Angela's phone buzzed. An encrypted message. She opened it, face darkening. She handed it to Curtis. On the screen, a document titled Project Shatterbox. Blacklisted contributors. Second name on the list: Hawkins, Curtis. Next to it, in red, flagged threat to defense narrative. He was silent for 20 years. Now his case may rewrite military history. They filed the lawsuit at 9:02 a.m. on a crisp Monday morning. Angela Wynn stood on the courthouse steps in Washington, D.C., flanked by her legal team, surrounded by reporters, cameras, and the quiet presence of Curtis Hawk Hawkins, who wore no suit, no polished shoes, just the same worn USAF jacket that had come to symbolize everything the system tried to erase. Allegations: intellectual theft, racial discrimination, career sabotage, historic erasure. The brief cited 64 pages of evidence, including confidential files from the Phoenix Override Project, blueprints stripped of attribution, declassified memos, and a damning list of blacklisted contributors. Hawk's name was among them, next to a red-coded line reading, Threat to Defense Narrative. Within an hour, news broke across every major network. Public reaction ignited immediately, and divisively. Some hailed Hawk as a hero finally receiving his due, a whistleblower who dared to challenge the very institution that benefited from his silence. Others branded the lawsuit as a betrayal, unpatriotic, a smear on national security. Defense pundits filled the airwaves. Let's be clear, one retired general said on a news panel. This man waited decades, and now wants credit? That's not bravery, that's revenge. But countering voices hit harder. He didn't wait, another veteran said on the same broadcast. He was silenced. There's a difference. Across the country, protests surged. In Selma, Alabama, Hawk's hometown locals organized a march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, holding signs reading, "No more erased names," and "Hawk was always flying." In New York, engineering students walked out of class wearing black jackets, in solidarity. In Los Angeles, retired veterans, both black and white, gathered at City Hall with photos of the aircrafts they once flew, many unknowingly supported by Hawk's technology. The movement was named Legacy Restored. Then came the testimony. Dozens of veterans contacted Angela's firm, offering their own stories, some eerily similar. A former black radar specialist in Colorado, who'd been stripped of a promotion after developing a tracking enhancement mysteriously replicated by a colleague weeks later. A female systems analyst who discovered her work had been sold to private contractors under another name. A pilot who, in tears, admitted that his entire career was shaped by tech he never knew, came from a black engineer. "I owe him my wings," he said on camera, "and I didn't even know his name until last week." Angela compiled it all. The pattern became undeniable. The DoD issued a press statement 2 days before the hearing, denying all allegations. "Our systems of recognition are complex," it read, "but never discriminatory. The department respects all who contribute to national security." The statement didn't mention Hawk by name. That only fueled public backlash. Congress, pressured by growing unrest, agreed to hold a special hearing, the first of its kind in decades to address systemic racial bias in defense innovation and patent ownership. Hawk was called to testify. Inside the hearing room, the tension was cinematic. Angela stood beside Hawk as he took the oath. He did not flinch. He did not shake. He looked every senator in the eye as he sat, then leaned into the microphone. "I didn't come here to reclaim a title," he said. "I came to correct the record." The room fell into a tense silence. Hawk continued. "For years I was told my ideas were good, but too advanced for promotion. I watched my work disappear under names of those who couldn't even explain it. I stayed quiet because I believed the system would eventually correct itself." But silence, he looked directly at the committee. "Never fixed a jet." He outlined his design for the Phoenix override, how it was stripped and resold, how he was flagged as a narrative threat, how his name vanished even from the blueprints he designed under military contract. When one senator asked why he waited until now, Hawk replied, "I didn't wait, I was buried." Critics tried to frame the lawsuit as a personal vendetta, but when Angela revealed that defense contractors made over $94 million in deals, using Hawk's intellectual property, with no credit, no royalties, and no consultation, the narrative shifted again. Under oath, a former project manager from Langley admitted, "We all knew who designed the override system. We were told not to speak his name." Hawk didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He only nodded once. Outside, protests grew. Some carried signs that read, "This time he gets to land." Others, "Reparations aren't just money, they're memory." But opposition also intensified. Conservative commentators called it a woke assault on military integrity. Anonymous threats were made against Angela's office. Forums exploded with debates over patriotism, race, and recognition. Still, the hearing continued. The court date was set. The trial began 6 weeks later. National media watched every step. Cameras weren't allowed in the courtroom until the final day. At the 11th hour, the presiding judge, Judge Eleanor Kirkland, a former Air Force pilot herself, made a bold decision. She signed an order declaring, "In the interest of historical accuracy and national transparency, the ruling in Hawkins v. United States Department of Defense will be read in an open courtroom, televised nationally." Reporters gasped. Angela looked over at Curtis. "They'll see," she whispered. "One way or another." Hawk said nothing. He only stared at the seal of the court, thinking not of revenge, but of all the birds he helped take flight, and how many were still flying, never knowing who gave them wings. As the judge left the chamber, a clerk handed Angela a sealed envelope. She opened it and froze. Inside was a confidential deposition from a former DoD advisor. The final line read, "We erased Hawkins to protect procurement deals already signed. Undoing that could cost the government billions. Injustice has a long runway, but today it lands." The courtroom was packed beyond fire code. Journalists crammed into every seat, tripods perched in corners, wires snaking across the carpet. Viewers across the country tuned in, streaming live from phones, laptops and mounted TVs in classrooms, offices, barbershops. Every eye was locked on the wooden bench at the front of the chamber. At precisely 10:00 a.m., Judge Eleanor Kirkland entered. Curtis Hawkins didn't shift. He'd spent enough time in rooms that underestimated him. This one couldn't rattle him now. Beside him sat Angela Wynne, posture firm, jaw locked, folder unopened. They didn't need to review anything. They had already lived the proof. Judge Kirkland adjusted her glasses, cleared her throat, and began. "In the matter of Hawkins versus the United States Department of Defense," she said, her voice steady, "this court has reviewed over 1,000 pages of documentation, 47 hours of testimony, and multiple historical precedents concerning invention attribution, racial bias in military systems, and classified contribution suppression." She paused. "We find in favor of the plaintiff, Curtis Hawkins." A breath rippled through the room like a wave crashing in slow motion. The court rules that Mr. Hawkins's intellectual property was knowingly used without credit, and his exclusion from project authorship was motivated in part by systemic racial bias. She leaned forward. Therefore, his military record will be fully restored. His name will be retroactively added to all known versions of the Phoenix Override development, and he is entitled to compensatory damages totaling $18.6 million for intellectual theft and reputational harm. Cameras flashed. Somewhere someone in the back whispered, "They actually did it." But Hawk didn't smile. Not yet. The nation responded instantly. Social media trended with Hawk wins. Evening anchors recapped the story in slow, dramatic arcs. Civil rights activists called it a landmark case, a ripple moment that could reframe how unsung contributors in military and STEM fields are recognized, especially those of color. Others weren't so supportive. Defense lobbyists warned that the verdict could open the floodgates for lawsuits from long-forgotten personnel with unprovable claims. But the tide of public opinion had turned. The Pentagon issued a press release the next day, a formal apology to Hawk, and the immediate formation of a new racial equity and innovation oversight task force to investigate historical erasures within the Department of Defense. It was the first time in U.S. military history that a civilian had triggered policy change from inside a courtroom. 3 weeks later, Hawk received another envelope. This one arrived by hand. An Air Force major in full dress blues stood at his front porch, hat in hand. Inside the envelope, an invitation from the Secretary of the Air Force, offering Hawk a permanent seat on the National Aviation Leadership Board, an advisory council overseeing innovation, ethics and personnel development in top-tier aerospace programs. Hawk read the letter slowly, then looked up at the major. "Tell her I accept," he said. He folded the letter once. No need for dramatic speeches. At Edwards Air Force Base, changes happened quickly. Matheson's office was stripped. Internal diversity councils were funded. A new training program, modeled after the systems Hawk once built in secret, was added to the official tech curriculum. They called it the resonance doctrine, learning to feel what machines couldn't say. But the most symbolic change came not from paperwork, but from the tarmac. On a cloudless Friday morning, a freshly repainted F-16 rolled out of Hangar 7. Sleek, balanced, alive. Above its nose cone, Hawk 1. The name shimmered beneath the sun. The base hosted a quiet rededication ceremony. No cameras, no grand speeches, just Collins, Maya, Reggie, and a few dozen engineers who now knew better than to laugh at legends in janitor uniforms. Collins would be flying the bird, his first solo demonstration under the new oversight protocols. Hawk stood in the tower, head set around his neck, arms folded as the jet hummed to life. "You nervous?" Maya asked, nudging his shoulder. Hawk gave a slight grin. "He's got her. She'll listen." From the tower he watched as Collins lifted Hawk 1 off the ground. Smooth, crisp, no delay in command. The jet sliced through the air like a final exhale, an echo of vindication. As Collins completed his loop and banked back toward the runway, Hawk raised his hand and gave the kind of salute you don't teach in any academy. The one that says, "You heard me after all." When the jet touched down, wheels kissing asphalt, Hawk took a long breath. He didn't cry. He didn't celebrate. He simply looked at the bird he'd once brought back from the dead and whispered under his breath, "You're free now." The screen fades to black. A narrator's voice echoes, calm and steady. But this wasn't the end. He fixed the jet. But what he really rebuilt was belief. Years passed. The headlines faded. The cameras turned elsewhere. But the name Curtis Hawkins remained, not just in court records or archived footage, but in classrooms, etched into walls, and spoken in voices that once never imagined someone like him could ever exist. In Selma, Alabama, where Hawk had first watched planes crawl across rusted skies, the local school district made a decision that shocked even the most skeptical board members. They renamed its flagship science and technology magnet program the Curtis Hawkins School of Aeronautics and Applied Engineering. It wasn't just a name change. It was a curriculum shift. 15-year-olds now studied not only fluid dynamics and flight simulations, but also the ethics of invention, credit, and silence. A required course was titled Invisible Architects of American Innovation. The first lesson each semester began with the question, who gets remembered and who gets erased? Curtis's story was the first answer they learned. The Department of Defense, still managing the ripples from the lawsuit, commissioned a full historical reevaluation of the Phoenix override timeline. The resulting report was honest, shockingly so. It confirmed that not only had Hawk's work been stripped of attribution, but it had also served as the basis for at least 7 derivative systems used in both combat and civilian aviation contexts. The Air Force, breaking from tradition, added Hawk's biography to their official USAF Innovation and Legacy curriculum, studied by every cadet during leadership development modules. One of the archived modules began with footage of a jet lifting off from a desert runway, the tail glinting in the sun with 2 words painted just beneath the cockpit. Hawk 1. Every year, on the week of Veterans Day, cadets from across the country visited a modest home on the outskirts of Edwards Air Force Base. They didn't come for autographs. They came to listen. Cadets nicknamed him the Whisperer of Broken Wings. They said it like myth. But when they met him, older now, hair white, spine slower, they understood that the whisper wasn't magic. It was patience. It was the ability to hear what others ignored. He sat on his porch in a creaky wooden chair, same patched jacket over his shoulders, coffee in hand. The porch creaked too, but everything still worked, just like him. Sometimes the kids asked him technical questions. Other times, they asked him how it felt. He never answered immediately. He'd just sip his coffee, squint into the afternoon light, and say something like, "I didn't fix the jet. I just reminded it how to remember itself." They'd scribble notes furiously. Later, some of them would go on to design systems of their own. Some would even cite Hawk's analog repair methodology as a breakthrough in empathetic diagnostics, a term coined in a grad paper at MIT. One afternoon, as the sky shifted into late summer gold, a familiar black SUV pulled up. Tyler Collins stepped out, now in full dress uniform. The bars on his shoulders gleamed. His stride was sharper than before. Command had refined his posture, but his grin was the same. He walked up the porch steps, saluted, then dropped the formality and hugged Hawk tight. "You're looking slower," Collins said, grinning. "And you're looking cockier," Hawk replied. "I blame myself." They sat. No need for small talk. Collins handed him a small wooden plaque. On it a photo of Hawk 1 in full flight. Beneath it, they laughed. Then it flew. Hawk held it in both hands for a long moment. "That's what they're saying now?" he asked. Collins nodded. "That's what they'll always say." Back on base, Hawk 1 had become more than a jet. It was a teaching tool, a memorial and a benchmark for modern fighter repair systems. No other bird was maintained with such obsessive precision. Reggie became lead flight systems analyst at a major defense contractor. Maya returned to New Mexico to head up an aerospace academy for underrepresented youth. Every year, they both returned to Edwards for the Hawk 1 ceremonial inspection. It was a ritual now, a way of making sure the story didn't gather dust. Hawk never asked for more. He didn't want awards. He didn't need fame. But on the quiet nights when the wind swept through the yard like it did back when he was a boy standing by that old abandoned airstrip, he'd think about the pilots who flew with systems they never knew he built. the lives he helped save without ever receiving a thank you. He didn't regret the silence. He just wished the silence had ended sooner. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air turned amber, Hawk stood from his porch and walked out to the edge of the yard. A faint trail in the distance marked the vapor stream of a training jet. He raised a hand in salute, not because anyone could see, but because some habits, some honors, aren't for cameras.
They're for memory.
The screen begins to fade. Then real archival footage appears. Black engineers, airmen, and cadets entering the USAF halls. A narrator's voice speaks as the music swells. They tried to erase his name. Instead, they carved it into the sky. Fade to black. They buried his name, stole his genius, and called it protocol. But the truth refused to stay silent. If you believe stories like Curtis Hawkins deserve to be remembered, not erased, type yes if you believe in justice. Subscribe if this broke your heart.